So as part of our research, we looked at three main options that Julie's already alluded to. The Nutrition Information Panel, which has been mandatory in New Zealand since 2002 and is usually on the back or the side of processed food. We've got the percent daily intake label in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. That's an industry-led initiative, and that's a voluntary front-of-pack label that you might often see on breakfast cereals or other processed food. And in the middle, the traffic light label, which has been in use in the UK and is not currently in use in New Zealand. And in order to understand how information processing influences behaviour, we use this model, the heuristic systematic processing model. And as you can see from the red line along the top, it operates on a continuum. And on one end of the continuum is systematic processing, which requires a detailed background knowledge of how labels work, their cognitive capacity in order to be able to interpret the labels, and motivation to spend the time and actually analyse them. As you can see, it involves careful reading and processing of information to make deliberate choices. And the Nutrition Information Panel and the Percent Daily Intake Panel that you can see here really require quite a high degree of systematic processing in order to interpret those labels. On the other end of the continuum is heuristic processing, which bypasses all that detailed information processing and emphasises simple rules or responding to visual cues. And the traffic light label and also a number of these sort of signalling labels like the very successful Heart Foundation tick really only require that sort of heuristic processing and much more accessible to people, and particularly people who are in a hurry or have low motivation. Okay, on to our research. We used a quantitative methodology. We recruited people from an online nationwide consumer panel, the Smile City panel, which has about 125,000 New Zealanders registered with it. And we recruited 600 individuals diagnosed with elevated blood pressure or hypertension and 300 from a general population panel sample. And we showed them 3 brands of baked beans, all fictitious. We use baked beans because it's a processed food. It's a food that a lot of people buy and can identify with. We used the 3 front-of-pack label formats that we talked about before. The control was no front-of-pack, the percent daily intake and the traffic light. All of the products had the nip on the back is consistent with New Zealand purchasing environment. We also used some product claims. The control was no product claim, and 2 nutrition claims, the reduced salt claim and the low salt claim, and 2 nutrition profiles, which varied only in the amount of salt contained. So we didn't vary any other nutrients, and we didn't include price in the model. And we used a regression analysis. So I'll show you a bit more clearly what we mean. So each respondent saw 10 screens, each with 3 options, and what they could see was the front of these cans, the top boxes here that I'm just indicating here. So 3 fictitious brands of baked beans, each with slightly different labelling formats. If they hovered their mouse over the image, the rear of the can appeared, and as you can see, that they all had the Nutrition Information Panel, as is consistent with what they'd have in the supermarket, although it's a bit bigger than most baked bean cans, so we thought we'd better do that so they could actually read it. And in the top right hand you can see the 2 nutrition claims, the reduced salt and the low salt. New Zealand regulations are that the product can be labelled low salt if it contains less than 120 milligrams of sodium per 100 grams, and reduced salt if the food has at least 25% less sodium than the comparative reference food. So what we did is we were able to put the reduced salt claim on both the high and low sodium products, but the low salt claim was only eligible for the low sodium product. So this is a summary of the demographics of our sample. The group that was not hypertensive here, and the group that were hypertensive on the right. As you can see, there were the hypertensive group was slightly older than the non-hypertensive group. There was about 57–58% female, and a range of ethnicity, although not exactly representative of the New Zealand population. Our Māori and Pacific groups were slightly less than the New Zealand population. But we didn't power the study to make ethnic-specific comparisons, so we weren't overly alarmed by that, but that's obviously a limitation of the study. Oops, sorry. Okay, so here are the results. Slightly complicated slide, and I'll apologise for that, but we'll go through this slowly. So this is the result of the regression analysis. We have utility here on the x-axis, no, the y-axis, sorry. So we have utility on the y-axis, and this is a bit like an odds ratio or a relative risk, so that we have the control product, which has no front of pack label, and a high sodium product assigned the reference category of 1, and if something is a 2, then it's twice as attractive as the control product. So we have the hypertensive groups here in the blue and the non-hypertensive groups in the red, and along the x-axis we have the different labelling formats. So the no front of pack format just has the nutrition information panel on the back, the % daily intake here, and the traffic light here. So if we look through the slide, we can see that people generally preferred the low sodium product, the second in each of these pairs. People generally preferred the low sodium product, and those with high blood pressure were slightly more likely to prefer the low sodium product. The difference between the attractiveness of the high and low sodium product was enhanced by the addition of a front of pack label. So the differences are greater with both of the front of pack label formats. However, the % daily intake also increased the attractiveness of the high sodium product compared to the control. So even though it's exactly the same sodium content, the presence of the % daily intake seemed to increase the attractiveness of it. And it's only the traffic light label here on the right that decreased the attractiveness of the high sodium product. So the traffic light label appears to have enabled people to discriminate better between the high and low sodium products. So moving on to the next slide. Again, a complicated slide, but I think if we go through it slowly, you'll see what it's all about. This time we didn't separate the people with high blood pressure and those without, so we lumped them all together because there was not a significant difference between the two. And the blue dots here represent the low sodium products, and the purple squares the high sodium products. This slide shows the addition of the claims. So we've got, for the no front of pack, we've got the reduced salt claim and the low salt claim, and the same with the PDI, reduced salt, low salt, and the traffic light label. So, as we've seen before, people generally preferred the low sodium product. The blue dots generally appear higher than the high sodium products here, the purple squares. In general, although not entirely, but in general, the addition of the claim of either of these claims increased the utility of the products. So if you're looking across, here's the control with no claim, and adding the claim increased the utility of the high sodium products right across here. So we add the claim and the utility is increased. And a similar sort of pattern across with the low sodium product. Again, as we saw previously, the addition of the front of the % daily intake label increased the utility of the product, even though the nutrient profile remains the same. And again, only the traffic light was able to counteract the effect of the addition of the claim, so that only the traffic light was able to decrease the utility of the high sodium product, even in the presence of the reduced salt claim. So just to summarise the main results, front of pack labelling strongly increased the ability to differentiate between the low and high salt products, but the traffic light labels stimulated the strongest discrimination. And enabled people to identify particularly the high salt products. We did expect to see greater differences between those with hypertension and those without, and we were surprised that there wasn't a huge difference, but nevertheless an overall population discrimination is more important given that the excessive salt intake exists across the whole population. And then there's also the issue with the nutrition claims. So front of pack nutrition claims such as reduced salt or low salt increased the preference, but the traffic light was more effective at moderating the claim influence than the percent daily intake. And so we concluded that the traffic light was more effective at informing choice than the percent daily intake label. So final conclusions, we know that excessive salt intake poses serious health risks to the population and that we should be initiating some preventive measures. And if we're thinking about measures to alter demand, we should use traffic light labels because they promoted the strongest discrimination and represented the best policy option to shape policy choice. And the traffic light label was also the most successful at ameliorating the potentially ambiguous product claims. And I'll just leave you with this. Certainly we need to improve food labelling, but we also need to improve the quality of the food that we produce. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for that fantastic presentation and sharing your research. That is all we have time for today. I thought I'd just put this slide up again and encourage people to download the food labelling snapshot on our website. The address is there. And also, if you're interested in tuning into future webinars, you can subscribe to the ANA database. And to do that, you just need to visit the homepage of our website and follow the link to subscribe. And finally, we welcome any feedback about the webinar or the food labelling snapshot on the email address. So thank you and goodbye.